Committee. So Adam, would you give us a briefing on the bill? I'll open the hearing on Senate Bill 1897.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 97 would grant purchasers of non-highway vehicles the option to obtain a non-highway certificate of title. Currently, non-highway vehicles are exempt from the registration under Kansas law. However, such vehicles are required to obtain a non-highway certificate of title upon the sale or transfer of such vehicle, and such application shall be made to the county where the person resides. Under Senate Bill 97, this would allow the owners of the vehicles the option of whether or not to obtain the non-highway certificate of title. So it essentially changes the shall to a may wherever it requires currently under law. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Seeing none, thank you. First up is a proponent. We have Senator Owens. Welcome to the Transportation Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee, and a special thanks to Adam. He and I had to spend quite a bit of time getting to what we were trying to accomplish here because of how confusing the current state statutes are. And so let me first start by saying, out in full disclosure, I own and operate a power sports business. I acquired this company about a year ago, and this is one of the primary issues that we have run into that I've realized not even the state has clear direction on, which is the impotence for changing this. So as mentioned, Kansas law does not require the registration of non-highway vehicles. And as a result, many individuals choose not to title their non-highway vehicle either. And when I'm speaking of non-highway vehicles, we're talking about four-wheelers, utility vehicles, dirt bikes, anything that does not have to be have a tag on the road, so a non-highway vehicle. Kansas law does, however, require an individual to obtain a non-highway title. But again, rarely does this occur because there's no enforcement. So here's where it gets interesting. As a dealer, I called the Kansas Department of Revenue Dealer Licensing to ask if, as a retailer, I am required to provide purchasers with a non-highway title. Do I have to make sure that I take a titled unit to sell a non-highway titled unit? When I called the first time, they said, yes, every unit must be. And so we've operated that way, much to the detriment of our business. So then I called 2 months later, and I got a totally different response. And it said, the person in dealer licensing said, no, absolutely not. It's a non-highway vehicle. Why would you have to have a title to sell it? So then I gave it a couple more months, and I called back, and I got a different set of instructions. And so ultimately, some think are required, some think we're not required. And the reality is, by making that requirement on dealers, people then, in many instances, choose one of two options. They either sell their unit online, or an individual purchase where no sales tax is collected, no economic benefit to the state, because, again, while the law says you should obtain a non-highway title, many people choose not to. Or they go to some bordering states, such as Nebraska, I believe I listed, and Missouri, if I remember correctly. I'm looking through my notes here, that don't have this same requirement. And so ultimately what we're doing is incentivizing people to go across the border to do business and to trade in their units with dealers. So as I mentioned, customers either sell them personally or they go to Nebraska or Missouri. So as I've researched this, I've learned really the primary purpose behind requiring of a title of non-highway vehicles is to ensure that it ends up on a county tax roll, okay? That really is what I've come to understand is the primary benefit. And hopefully if everything goes right this year, that won't even be necessary because we'll eliminate the taxes on these types of vehicles anyway. And so again, changing this law really does clarify it. When Adam and I met with members of the Kansas Department of Revenue for an online meeting to work out the details, even the leadership, could not definitively answer the question of whether a dealer has to have a non-highway title and transfer that non-highway title to an individual. So last but not least, I had one of my employees reach out to the county, Harvey County, and ask the question, okay, do we have to have a non-highway title? Harvey County then contacted Department of Revenue and was instructed that no, all we have to provide is a bill of sale. But then when we provide a bill of sale, the individual is supposed to go to the county and get a non-highway title. So the confusion continues even more. So what I'm attempting to do is simply say, look, let's clarify this for dealers. It will incentivize more business in the state. And it will give people the option, if they want to obtain a non-highway title, they can, but it does not require it. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will stand for questions.
Committee questions. Senator Cluse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your testimony. Just for clarity's sake, how do lending institutions, credit unions, banks, I mean, do they require, they put a lien on a title? Is that the same thing, or do they just go off the ID number on it, or?
So it can be multiple ways. It could be through a title, a lien on a title, but it also can be through UCC. Lien on it as well. And so it really just depends on the type of, whether you're using a title or you're not using a title, would be my assumption, to be honest. Most of the lending that we do are either on new units, which always come with an MSO, Manufacturer Statement of Origin, and we've never had any concerns with lending on used units before we found out initially that the law said we had to do this, right? So we started doing it, and now that we've backed off of it. So you can put a UCC lien on something as well.
Okay, so
It's a very valid question.
So you don't follow up, you don't foresee that being an issue then?
I don't, but I definitely want to research that. Part of having this hearing was to really get some of those questions. So let me find out that question, the answer to that question, and then I'll get back to you and allow the committee to receive that information as well.
Okay, thank you.
If you would get back and send it to Florence, she can distribute it to the whole entire committee.
Absolutely, I will do so. And I'll figure out, because as I mentioned, Nebraska and Missouri don't require the non-highway titles. So my assumption is there's some way around that, but I will find out and let you know.
Okay.
The only thing I'd add is the bill would still give people the option to get a title. It doesn't remove the ability to obtain a non-highway certificate of title. So the option would still remain there. It just doesn't make it mandatory.
Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for your testimony and your research. I have kind of a similar question regarding theft and stolen vehicles. Do these vehicles have VINs, and are we concerned about stolen vehicles being resold? And if you don't have the title, that would impact your ability to sell a stolen vehicle?
I appreciate that question. So in a former life, I actually was a pawnbroker and dealt with this quite regularly. I know I've been involved in more businesses than I can count, but same question applies to a television, right? A computer, anything really of value that doesn't have a title. There is a certain amount of risk that might exist there, but these units do have VIN numbers. And so if there is any concern, and certainly we have an obligation as a dealership, if somebody's coming from out of state or there's any suspicion, we can absolutely call law enforcement and have that VIN checked if we choose to do so. But, you know, a lot of people that we deal with, I know especially in our business, the relationships, community members, things like that. So it's less of a concern, but if there is a concern, there is a mechanism where you could check a VIN number, absolutely.
Well, I'm thinking, you know, your computer and your home and your TV are often, you know, secured in a home or business, whereas these are vehicles, they're sometimes outside and things like that. So you didn't find in your research that without the requirement of a non-highway title, it might lead to the sale of more stolen vehicles?
Honestly, I did not know, as I researched Nebraska and Missouri, for example, that don't have this requirement. There was never any concern expressed, because some of these changes happened, I believe in 2004 was in Nebraska, that there's been any increase in that type of activity. Quite to the contrary, what we found is, especially on those border towns, people that don't have a title or chose not to title them like to go across the border, because then they can actually trade them in towards new units and not have to face the non-highway title issue faced by current dealers.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Senator Corson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to make sure I'm understanding, so if you're a dealer and I'm a purchaser, if this bill were to go into effect, I would get from the dealer, I would get a bill of sale, and that's how I would then be able to show that I am now the lawful owner of this.
That is correct, sir, and you can actually take that to the county. Harvey County verified this with a bill of sale and obtain a non-highway title if you choose to do so.
Okay, that's perfect. I just wanted to make sure I was understanding that process correctly. So thanks for answering that, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to follow up a little bit on what Senator Warren was talking about. I was thinking of the numbers of ATV issues we've had over the years in my area where they're out in a field somewhere, they cause damage, they leave the vehicle, and how would law enforcement be able to, the county sheriff be able to even track who owned that? I mean, that was my question.
Certainly. I would say that in an instance like that, that is a fair point. They would be able to track it back at least on some level. Similar, I'll just use this example with firearms. When a firearm is initially registered, when it is sold new, they can trace it back, but then there's no requirement of any certificate of title or anything like that to be transferred. So sometimes there would be that instance where they may not be able to track it in that situation. I think that's valid. I would say that obviously those are the exceptions, not the rule, right? Is the best way to put it. It could be the case, but I suppose if they were really that interested, they could run fingerprints and all sorts of stuff.
Thank you for your answer. And Mr. Chair, this might be a question for you. We don't have any response from Department of Revenue. Did they know about the hearing? Did they?
I can tell you they certainly knew about the bill because we met with 3 of them, and they knew what we were working on. I'm certainly not going to speak to whether they objected or not. What they did do is certainly acknowledge that there's inconsistencies in the law, and that there's not clear direction for dealers especially.
I guess, Mr. Chair, I would want to, if we're going to work the bill, I'd sure want to hear from Department of Revenue if possible. And I'd be happy to make that call. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the follow-up opportunity. Just to follow up what the good senator here was asking, a bill of sale isn't recorded anywhere that you would be able to determine if you needed to find out who the owner of the vehicle was. That's not recorded anywhere. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, bill of sales don't have any central repository. That is correct.
Right. It's a privately held document, and then to track down, well, who owns this that caused damage, you'd have some work to do, but thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Stephen, or Senator, I am correct that this is optional. A person that bought one from a bill of sale could go to their county. They could get a non-highway title, so then it would be recorded. And if their vehicle is stolen, they would have it registered.
Absolutely right. When I look at this, and I recognize that inherently we're used to the idea of having vehicles titled, right? But short of vehicles and titling, when you're concerned about theft of anything else, there is an investigative process, and I utilize firearms only because initially there is some recording from the manufacturer to the dealer in that initial sale. But then beyond that, that piece of property can change hands as many times as that piece of property changes hands. And so tracking down who the actual owner is on anything other than a titled vehicle certainly requires additional investigative processes.
Senator Bowers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Stephen. As your car dealer on the committee, you charge sales tax on the ATV, so then you're recording that to the state monthly as who bought that vehicle. So the state does have the name of the person who bought that vehicle from your, or vehicle that, I sell vehicles, but your ATVs on record through that monthly report, right?
Actually, no, because it is not required for non-highway vehicles. Only registerable titled highway vehicles are reported through dealer licensing on that monthly report. But that is a
It's
very
one way
important
to
point.
trace it, though, if the state wanted to know who owned that.
That's true, is adding that to that monthly report wouldn't be a big deal because our system already does that. You touched initially on the sales tax, right? And the more vehicles we're able to bring in and then retail, sales tax is being collected on those transactions, whereas when they're sold on personal transactions, there's obviously no sales tax captured person to person, especially when there's no registration requirement.
And if I might just add, if I'm looking at that monthly sales report in my head, we do have a box that we can check that we collected sales tax. So being so close to Nebraska, I don't collect sales tax then, but I still report that vehicle. I still think this is a way that you could report this sale. Then the state would have a record of a person who bought it, whether it's non-highway or not.
That's
So
a very, very,
that might be your way around, someone knows who owns it last.
that's a very valid point.
So,
Thank you.
thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Oh, thank you guys very much, and I will follow up on these questions and concerns. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any other proponents wishing to testify on this bill? Any opponents? Any neutrals? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 97. Committee, I'd like to turn our attention to Senate Bill 18. Adam, could you give us a quick briefing? I believe that's a 100 Nation license plate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 18 would provide for the 100 Nation new distinctive license plate. In the bill, we require payment of up to $5,000 in development costs, as is currently required for distinctive plates. There'd be the option or the ability for an annual local use royalty payment fee in an amount of $25 up to $100 to be determined by 100 Nation. And the fee would go to 100 Nation Inc. Section 2 of the bill would decrease the requirements for when the division of vehicles would proceed with manufacturing and the distribution of distinctive plates. This would be all distinctive plates. Under the bill, the initial plate commitment would be decreased from 250 to 100 plates.
Senator Tyson, I believe you said you had an amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have an amendment. Is it okay to have that passed out right now?
Yes.
And while they're passing it out, if I may, Mr. Chairman, the amendment would just take the language back to what other license plates do. I found out, thanks to Adam, his research, there are 4 other plates in Kansas that are under this 100 plate limit, but we heard from the conferee, he's fine with the 250 plate limit. And instead of rocking the boat, we will just make it amended and be like the rest of the plates. So I move on my amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It'll be interesting to see if this gets amended further on the floor. It's a license plate bill, and so remains to be seen. But I move this bill, that we pass this bill out as amended favorably for passage.